did too recently because it would vibrate. I use it as my alarm.
Yay!
It would vibrate inside. Wakes you up. Like
Good evening.
overnight emails. Good evening.
Actually, I'm too used to saying good evening. Good afternoon.
Afternoon it is.
Welcome to our special joint meeting this evening between the City of Camas and the City of Washougal. Welcome to folks that we don't normally see here within the chambers on a regular basis. To all of our distinguished guests from Camas, thank you for being here, and all the staff that are here as well. Before we get started, I do want to make sure and point out, it does kind of look like a bunch of guys up here and some of the ladies down here, but we didn't have room to get everybody up here. You hadn't noticed that yet, had you?
Well, wait
I
till
would
Brent
have.
comes.
I would have.
When Brent comes.
Rose, can you go backward in the tape and just forget I said any of that?
Oh, I know this.
No, we kind of went off of seniority and saw where we could fit things in and make it, so it wasn't going to work no matter what.
I'm telling Brent
So-
what he said, though, that's for sure.
He'll watch the tapes later, I'm sure, anyway. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Mayor Higgins,
Here.
Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Hogan,
Here.
Councilmember Diesman,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Turk,
Here?
Councilmember Cheney,
Here.
Councilmember Hazen. And for Washougal, Mayor Shangard,
Here.
Councilmember Boger, Councilmember Plinsky,
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay,
Here?
Councilmember Greenlee,
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel, Councilmember Shoemaker,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
No, Councilmember Boger should be here at any time. We haven't heard anything from Councilmember McDaniel, though. And-
Councilmember Hazen is still on his way back from spring break, so unable to be with us tonight.
Made a business trip on the way.
Right.
Scott, anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Well, the only thing is that we did schedule this meeting a while back, and as many know, started crafting the agenda with hopes that our new administrator would be able to be here and help partner in with David on the administration side tonight. But Nina has had to take care of some unplanned medical issues that came up, and so that is keeping her away from us tonight. But she's been working very closely with David and the rest of the administration staff to get us ready for today. So she'll be missed, but we'll see a lot of her work in what gets presented by David and others. So that's all.
Our first item on the agenda this evening is an opportunity for anyone from the public that would like to address either one of the councils or the group as a whole. Anybody that would like to address council? Not your only opportunity. We will have another one at the end of the meeting as well. Okay, seeing none at the start, we will go into our presentations this evening. This evening we have three items that are on the agenda, starting out with our Camas Washougal Municipal Court, our joint animal control following that, and then an update on fire consolidation. So if we could, Judge Higginson, thank you for being here. Chief Lackey?
Well, thank you, mayors and council. I'm happy to be back presenting again about the court. How's that? A little better?
Yeah.
As you know, about a year ago, I presented to both councils with Chief Mitchell about the prospects of Camas and Washougal exploring moving to their own true municipal court. We currently both contract with Clark County District Court for court services and correction services. And if you recall, we made presentations to the council that we were looking at the possibility about branching out to form our own court for two purposes. One was there were some customer service issues, and those were minor compared to, I think, the bigger issue, which was the financial one, which was we thought we could run the court and save with what we were paying the county on the combination of the correction side and the court side. So both councils were energized at looking at the concept, and we set out to do just that. We made some court visits to some other municipal courts around the state, and we talked to the presiding judge here at District Court. And as we looked at it, we even put money into our 2013 Camas budget to hire a court administrator at the end of the year to kind of get the process rolling. But something happened about mid-year in that process, and it was really working very closely with Judge Higginson where he proposed kind of a fourth option that we didn't consider. And that fourth option is what we want to kind of present to you tonight, is what we think has some value. And it was in the judge's view that he really saw that the potential for the cities of Camas and Washougal to have their own true municipal court was a valid view. But instead of trying to rush that and do it by the end of 2013 or in early 14, he really recommended we kind of slow down a little bit. And by slowing down, it lessened our risk to make maybe a real critical error if we had a real bright line deadline coming up at the end of this year. So while the judge saw some potential for us that it is in our future to run our own court, he wanted to explore maybe this fourth option, which is what can we do right now to maybe alleviate some of your customer service concerns and maybe some possibility to actually save the city some money as you take this kind of a slow baby step process towards your own court. So both of the mayors and the city administrators have been briefed on this concept, and we're staff and the mayors are kind of thumbs up on it. And I'd like to kind of turn it over to Judge Hagenson for a minute to talk about the court's view of why this makes sense. And then after the end of that, we'll be happy to field some questions. Judge?
Okay, and what we talked about really wasn't a new option. It's basically the option of establishing a standalone court. But it's just the timeline. I was involved with Larry Lene prior to the presentation, to some extent more so after the presentation. And with Larry, we identified a number of issues that came up as far as costs that we really couldn't put a number on. And my concern was there was going to be a lot of risk in basically jumping off the cliff and starting your own court, not knowing what those costs were going to be, and the things that had to be put in place to perform the court functions. And and actually it was in talking with Larry, what I suggested is that in district court, we've adopted the lien process. And what that is, that's a systematic approach to problem solving. I think, Steve, you have some background in that, don't you?
I have.
Okay. And what we did was we applied some lean tools in thinking about what we were doing as far as describing what our current situation is and where the cities want to be in the future. And we decided to use the lean tools and say, okay, our ultimate goal here is to establish a standalone court for Camas and Washougal. And then what we want to do is we have two customers that we want to serve. That's the public, and that's also the city administrations from a court standpoint. And so what we talked about was there's steps that you folks are going to have to take to implement your own court. And your choice is you can implement your own court and then say, okay, how do we do this? Do we bring somebody in to advise us? It's going to cost some money. How do we get these things wrapped up? That's one approach. Or the other approach is, let's just do it right now, and we can work all the bugs out. And what we'll do is, instead of taking the leap of faith and keeping our fingers crossed that we're going to save money, let's take it one step at a time, and let's address the different areas that we think we can save money on. Let's do it right now. And let's get those things in place. And ultimately, and I think it's a great idea to establish a standalone court. I think that the cities are going to have that, whether you want it or not, in a few years, because of the numbers of cases that you're going to have as the years go by. But this allows you to reach the point where you say, okay, it's time now to establish our standalone court. We've got everything in place. All the groundwork's been done. We know exactly what the numbers are. So you can make an informed decision at that time to make that move. And I think that's really the best way to make that decision, is to have all the information in front of you. And so that being said, some of the things that we're doing right now to accomplish that, and that's discussion we've had, and I've had that discussion with all of our district court judges and our administrative staff, is our ultimate goal is to have a standalone court for Camas and Washougal. So right now, everything that we do has to have value to our two customers and also for achieving that goal. And it actually is working out really neat, because the things we've done so far are pointing us in that direction, and we're realizing some very significant efficiencies that's going to lower the cost now. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And what it does for you folks, instead of making a decision, we're going to have a standalone court, and then maybe if you run into a roadblock a couple months or a couple years down the road, it's too late to turn back. What this is going to do is you always have that option open. And when the time comes to make that decision to pull the trigger, I guess I shouldn't use that term around him, but to pull the trigger on establish your court, you'll know when that time is and you'll feel very comfortable doing it. So some of the things that we're doing right now is, first of all, the cities have looked into or are just about ready to implement a city-run EHC, and that's electronic home confinement. Currently, that's something that the cities are paying the county to do, and you know, Mitch and Ron too, and other city folks have looked into that, and that seems to make a lot of sense. So we're moving in that direction. Another thing that we're doing is probation costs are a significant cost in the budget for you folks, and what we're doing is we've been moving more toward a true bench probation. Typically with probation, what we've been doing is somebody is sentenced, they report to a probation officer, the probation officer gives them instructions on what they need to do to complete their conditions. The probation officer monitors that. Ultimately, if they don't get done, it's cited before a judge on a show cause hearing where the defendant has to explain why they haven't gotten things done. That's the old model. What we're doing now, and we're implementing this slowly, is if I sentence somebody, they go out to the office and they're given directions on how to do things. We also give them a return court date. So, you know, depending on what the conditions are, it's either 60 or 90 days, and I just tell the defendant, okay, we're giving you a return court date. Here's when we have you scheduled. You're required to appear on that date unless you get your conditions completed, and you do that by bringing everything into the counter out front, and they'll tell you what conditions you have left to do. And so that has proven to be a very efficient way to handle those types of cases. And the cost savings for the cities is that it costs $1 a day to have somebody on probation. So if you multiply that times the number of folks, that's a significant figure, and that's what the cities pay, is $1 per day. And so we're looking at reducing costs there. Another thing that we're doing in district court that we're going to be presenting to the cities is going paperless. Right now, all of our civil cases are done paperless. We have no more paper files. Everything's done electronically. We're going to have our criminal system up and running by June 1st. And there's lots of bugs in that system that we're working through right now. And I know there was a suggestion that maybe the cities wanted to jump on board right now. And I think what we've kind of discussed is let's get all the bugs worked out in Vancouver. And then when those are all fixed, then we come here and install it here. And our county loss prevention folks are probably the most excited about the paperless because there's a lot of things that happen in distributing warrant cancellations, no contact orders and no contact order cancellations that are done manually. And whenever you do it manually, there's always room for error. And there's been some liability and a lot of potential liability associated with that, where if it's done electronically, it goes to who it needs to go to. It's in the computer file for people to look at. And like with Liberty, what would happen? Liberty is the system we use for paperless. What would happen is each PD would have, it's done by license with the company that owns Liberty, but typically there would be a license at the PD, and so a police officer, if there's a call and there's a concern about a no contact order violation, they can actually go into the court file and look and see when that order was issued. They can also see if it was ever rescinded. So, you know, it gives your officers more information to deal with, you know, when they're, you know, pulling into a situation. And, you know, that's always the best thing, is to have your officers have the most information available. We've also done some things like the times we were holding court were causing some conflict with some of the attorneys. And it was like, well, okay, you know, here's when we have court, you know, you're stuck with this. So we sat down and talked about it. We now have a new revised schedule where we're starting court a half hour earlier, and that works for the prosecutors and defense attorneys, where they have more time to meet their other obligations. And what that means to you folks is, if you have a situation where you have part-time prosecutors and part-time defense attorneys, they have other things that they have to do to make a living. So if we're more efficient and free them up for more time to do those things, they're not going to be coming to you and asking for more money. Well, they may ask for more money, they won't be asking for as much. So I think things are actually moving fairly smoothly, and one of the reasons I think it is previously we had 5 judges that would rotate in and handle the court every Thursday, and the problem that we were having was whenever a problem came up, the prosecutors, PDs, everybody was dealing with basically 5 different cooks in the kitchen, so they had to reinvent the wheel every time a judge came out. And then by the time the original judge came out, everybody kind of forgot what was talked about, so nothing was ever done. And so our judges, we had a meeting, and all of the judges decided it would make sense to have one judge cover everybody's rotation and deal with some of these issues and, you know, get everything leaned out and as efficient as possible. And then at that point, we talk about, you know, what we do from there. And I'm the one that drew the short straw or the long straw, whichever, however you want to look at it. But it's working out really good. I've got the support of all of our judges, and I just report back to them on things that we're doing, and you know, it's working out great because going out once every 5 weeks. The bench up there had some materials from like 1989, and if I'm there once every 5 weeks, you know, I'm not going to mess with it. But now that I'm coming out every Thursday, that stuff's all cleaned up, and we've got everything whipped into shape. And so by doing that, obviously things are more efficient. So right now, we can't throw any numbers out as far as costs that are being saved, but I think if you talk to anybody that's that operates within the system, whether it be the PD or the prosecutors, they'll tell you that things are a lot more efficient and that we are saving money. So that's kind of the road we're going down. And ultimately, you folks are going to have to make the decision on, you know, when you pull the plug and go as a complete separate court from district court. But again, I think when that time comes, you folks will know because you'll have all of your ducks in order ready to make that move. So. Any questions?
Council members?
I've got a couple. The first one was, you said it was a paperless system, and I thought I heard you say that you'd like to let it work a little while longer so you see how it works in Vancouver. It's a Clark County system, isn't it?
Correct.
Paperless system?
Correct.
So did you mean the city of Vancouver, or did you mean through the system of Clark County's paperless
See,
administration?
district court has just gone paperless. Superior Court actually, you know, adopted the paperless program, but what they do is they actually run a paperless and a paper system. So they run 2 simultaneously because they've had trouble with people within their organization buying off on the paperless. Pretty much everybody in the state is going to it. King County is all paperless, and a number of the smaller courts are too. So we have adopted that, and we are
Me being the county?
district court.
District court,
District
okay.
court. And so we've already got our civil in place. We're moving to criminal, and it's not that we're testing it. We're already committed to it. We believe in it. But it's just that there's some bugs on, okay, how do we handle this particular thing? And how do we get that sent out to who it needs to go to? So those are the bugs we're working out. But I was talking to our court administrator today, Ella Selga, and she said that, you know, we're actually ready to move right now, but let's set our date out till June 1st so we can make sure we have everything up and tested before we actually go online with it.
And on the city level, we've had our Camas IT people make sure that in our court right here down on C Street that we have a high-speed scanner copier that will enable the paperless system to work on our end once the judge and the clerks are ready to go. So we're kind of maybe a little more eager for all of the ideas that the judge are bringing forward to say, hey, let's do it, let's do that too. And through his guidance, I can attest to the things that he said is factual. Our staff, the city attorneys are reporting satisfaction with the programs the judge is implementing, that we believe that we're seeing cost savings in things like these, not just putting everybody onto probation. You know, at $1 a day, Chief Mitchell and I literally have thousands of man days, you know, per quarter for these people that are sitting on a probation list, when it could be as simple as the court ordered the person to go out and get maybe an anger management class. Maybe the person did it within the first month, but he might have, in the old system, existed on a probation list for 2 years. So that'd be a $700 for that individual, when really he just had to go out, get a certificate, bring it back, and show the court that he completed it.
And my other question was, when you talked about real time for officers, is that currently I think it was a restraining order you were talking about, and if I heard you right, the officers had real-time access to see a record, see a restraining order?
They can actually go into the court file, yes, and pull, and right now, they don't have the ability to go into the court file and pull those up.
Right now, they don't?
Correct.
And you were talking about a system that will be available in the future for all?
The officer. Yeah, so the same thing that I have in court as far as a court file, the officer would have access to that.
That would be great.
Well, and then what it does too is right now a big issue is discovery, where you have defense attorneys wanting copies of the police reports in the file. Vancouver Defenders, that does a lot of work. They have the Washougal contract and also the Clark County contract. Right now, you know, they're just jumping up and down for joy because they all have their little tablets in the courtroom with them, and they can pull police reports, you know, instantaneously. And so, as far as discovery, that'll be a thing of the past where things have to be mailed out, and that we have attorneys saying, "Gee, I never got discovery," because it'll be up to them just to go into the case file and pull out what they need.
That's good.
So as we wrap up our presentation, I guess what we're asking today is, as a form of a check-in, do you believe that we are on the right path working with the judge on the programs and the ideas and the concepts that have been laid out? Which would be a departure from maybe where we were a year ago, which was a hasty exit from the court, to now a more planned, thought through and thorough, kind of a slowed down approach to this eventual exit that will almost just happen through a series of moves over maybe several years.
Paul?
I just wanted to say that I am greatly relieved because, as you point out, we felt very strongly that when we looked at this leaping to a district court, it really seemed like a leap of blind faith that we thought we had to make. And this step-by-step process is much more, feels much better to me than the leap of faith. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to underline, as a former IT person myself, although we didn't actually even call it IT back in the days of punched cards and IBM Big Iron, bugs are expensive to chase and stomp out. And so having somebody else do that before it comes to us is also a very, I like that. So I want to thank both of you for your work on this. It gives me a much higher level of comfort on moving toward what we all agree is ultimately going to be our own district court. So thank you.
Dave?
Just one quick question, Judge. Do you know what's driving the increase in court cases that you mentioned?
Well, actually, the driving force between increased court cases is going to be, criminal cases is going to be officers on the road. That's the one thing that it really doesn't matter what your population is. Your population can increase, and as you have more officers on the road, your cases are going to increase. And I'm assuming that in Camas and Washougal, as the population grows, that there will be officers added, and you know, which will result in more cases. But I think that's kind of a real interesting statistic is you look at areas that have high crime, a lot of times those areas just have more police officers per capita than places that have low crime. So it's one of those things where you know, you can file as many criminal cases as you want. It just depends on how many officers you have that are out there on the road doing the investigating and making the arrests and things. So I think it's just a natural progression, though, where you know, nationwide, there's more and more cases are being filed because you know, there typically are police officers added over a course of time. So that'll drive the increase.
So, so the crime is there, it's just a case of putting more people out there to bring it into the court.
Sure, I mean, and right now, most law enforcement agencies, they have a focus on the major crimes, and there's some other things that are happening out there that concern a lot of our citizens, and they're legitimate concerns, but there's just not the police power or the ability to go out and handle those types of things. I mean, it's, I don't think it happens so much in the communities of Camas and Washougal, but in Clark County, there's a lot of situations where somebody has a break-in, and they call the police, and the police come out and say, well, yeah, well, we're going to take a report, but we don't have the time to really investigate this. So, thank you and goodbye. And that's kind of a tough situations for citizens to swallow when, if it happens to you and you're the victim, it's a very important situation. And when there isn't the manpower out there to handle those, it can be quite disconcerting for the citizens. So,
Thank you, and that's why we have the Second Amendment.
Brent?
I'm new here, but I'm probably the only one I've never been in front of you, Judge, but I've been in district court once in a while. The Ninth Circuit too, but the district court. And I don't want to take up the 16 of us' time on this, but I'd like to have a one-on-one briefing, because I'm kind of surprised that there's actually been evidently a decision made to go to a standalone court eventually. That's kind of news to me. I wasn't aware of that. So,
well, and I guess maybe we should back up. I think that a good focus for us is to focus on reaching those ends, but not making the decision to do it, because with the lien process, what you have is you have to have an ultimate goal that everything you do has value to your customers and also toward that ultimate goal. And that's very consistent with what we need to do anyway. And so that's something that in the future, there's probably a really good chance that you won't go to your own court, because you're going to come down to the time where, okay, the only thing left to do is hire our own judge. And at this point, here's what it's going to cost. Here's what we're getting from district court, and this is cheaper. Why are we going to do this? And so, but at least you have the option of doing that in the future, where my concern is if we pull that off of the table and off as our ultimate goal, you can kind of lose focus on what you're doing. And, and I think, government in general has been doing that for probably the last, except for the last 5 or 6 years, for about 20 years, was let's just do these different things. They look like good ideas, but that gives us a focus. And so I think the value to you folks is you have that option out there, but it's not an option you have to take.
so there hasn't been a decision made. Then I'm not correct. Then because
Correct. Yeah, I don't think the decision has been made, but I think that you want to leave that open as an option.
Okay.
And if you don't pursue that, you're going to get down the road and say, okay, we need to have a standalone court, and you're back at square one. Where this way, we can put everything in place and have an efficient machine running, ready to turn over to the cities to run their standalone court. But at that point, the cities may make the decision based on different factors that, we don't want to do it right now. Let's just continue with how things are going. We're very satisfied. And then you do that. But to have that option out there, I think, is very valuable.
All right. Thank you.
I think in answer to your question, Mitch, what I like about what I'm hearing is that I'm hearing a plan of reaching towards a goal. The weakness that I think I'm hearing is that I don't understand how the financial impacts are going to take place, what the measurables are, and how we're going to achieve those. So as we drive, where are we going to try to drive the cost out and improve the service for the customers? That part is kind of fuzzy at this point for me.
I'll take that in two brief parts. To improve the service to the customers, like the judge said, the customers are the court clients or citizens who are going into the court either to appear before the court or to take some care of some sort of a court process. The other customers are our own city attorneys, our police officers who appear in court, and the staffs of the 2 police departments' records sections, who on an almost daily basis are shipping records to and from the court on court cases. The judge mentioned Ella Selga, who's the district court administrator.
Yes.
And Ella has been working with us in one of the things that was important to us is to kind of have some stability of the staff. Because the staff at our local court, who are all county employees, had been turning over a lot. And with every new employee coming out to Camas, you know, some maybe wanted to be here, some didn't want to be here, they'd rather be in Vancouver, but it was an assignment. So Ella has worked with us to find some staff who will be here permanently, not on a rotational basis, who actually desires to be out here in Camas and Washougal. And we'll let those relationships and professional developments build with the staffs of the 2 police departments and the city attorney's offices. That helps also because how they run court in Vancouver isn't necessarily how we run court out here in Camas, Washougal. It's close, but each court has its own flavor, I guess some local differences. And when the judges were rotating and when the staffs were rotating in the court, it caused some, I guess it just wasn't some consistency that we were looking for. So on the customer service side, by having that stuff freeze now with the judge taking the rotations for the other 5 judges and a consistent staffing on the clerical side in the court, we're starting to do some of these programs that you just couldn't do when the people were switching all the time.
Right. There's cohesion now.
On the money saving side, even when we made the presentations a year ago, what we said is there's 2 components to the court. Whether we run the infrastructure currently, we pay the rent on the building, all the utilities, and it got to where the only thing that we were buying from district court were the people. And so if we were going to make a true switch, the question is, do we go out and we buy our own people, our own city employees, and do the councils get their own judge? That cost, we didn't, even when we made our presentation a year ago, we saw no savings on that side. Where we saw the savings were on the court-based corrections programs. And I'll use what the judge mentioned was EHC, electronic home confinement. Now, several years ago, Don Cheney, who was chief, and Paul Peirce, who were the captain, they broke away from the county's work crew program when they saw that we could form our own local work crew, do an offender work crew that was managed here locally, and not pay fees for our people who are sentenced by the court to work crew to go do it in Vancouver. That was a great move, and in that same model, we could do EHC, electronic home confinement, for nonviolent offenders determined by the judge to qualify for electronic home confinement. We currently, both the City of Washougal and City of Camas, we pay the county to run that program for us. And when the offender is sentenced to the program, the offender pays to be on it. So Chief Mitchell and I have pulled our numbers together, and if we had been running our own work crew for the last 2 years, we would have saved, at the low end, $42,000. EHC, on the low end. So we actually are really excited and see that as kind of the next shoe to drop here as we investigate these cost savings. It seems to be the natural program to move to following the offender work crew model. In the meantime, there are things that the judge mentioned, like not putting everyone onto probation. So working closely with the city attorneys, when people appear before the court, it will be up to the judge's discretion if someone needs to be on to a standard probation that's monitored by the county, or if the person could be on what I will describe as bench probation, which was the judge just sets a date, I would like to see you again in 6 months to see if you have completed the things I've asked you to do. By not throwing that person onto a probation status, again, we save $1 per day, and the court sees a lot of people in that position. And I believe is it 2 years is the standard probation sentence?
Yes.
So if you thought of every person that went through the court that you read in the post record in the conviction area getting a 2-year sentence to probation, it's $700 per person, that the cities were paying on top of any fines that the people were paying. So now those decisions are being based upon the needs of the case as determined by the judge versus kind of just an automatic, we'll throw everybody into the same hopper and treat them all the same way.
Thank you.
Don?
The only comment that I have is that, and I'm relieved, as Paul mentioned, that we're going to try to stay with the county longer and maybe longer term. The one concern that I have, I'll express from 2 perspectives: one where I sit today, and one where I sat when I was where you were, Mitch, or today, Mitch. And that is my concern about how closely law enforcement is to the court system in terms of the functional process of court. We, in law enforcement, we're charged with prosecuting offenders. And even when we went to work crew, it felt a little bit of a compromise. As a matter of fact, during that process, we tried to hand that management of work crew over to Public Works. It was just too cumbersome, and it required a whole new bureaucracy for them to do that. So my comment is as we move to more efficiencies as a result of the things you mentioned, like electronic home confinement, that we try to be mindful of keeping that traditional separation between the court and the disposition of sentencing or whatever that is and the enforcement side. I think that's real important, if for no other reason than the public. I don't have a question with the ethical approach that our law enforcement folks might have today, but I have a concern about the perception that our public has about how we manage both sides together. So I just wanted to make that comment.
And Don, that's a real good point, because there is a separation of powers issue, because the court system, the judicial branch, is different than the executive branch. And it's one of those things where having a district court judge sitting as your municipal court judge creates somewhat of a separation. And it's one of those things where, you know, Ron Mitchell or Mitch, if they have a concern, they can come and we can talk about it. But the bottom line is, I have to do what I feel I have to do as a judge. And for people on the outside looking in, the one court that you folks visited up in Edmonds, that judge had said something to me about how in the world is the court system under the law enforcement budget. I said, well, that's the way it's been. And he said, wow, you know, that doesn't pass the smell test. And it's one of those things where that's something the city should think about, is getting the court system out from under the law enforcement umbrella and having it separate, and, you know, have it under a different department or the city manager or whatever. And that's something that's going to be critical as far as when the time comes, when you decide to do a standalone court, there's no way in the world that should still be under law enforcement. That needs to be pulled away from there.
Thank you.
Dave?
As I understand your question, though, that both of you have posed to us, it's whether or not the deliberate approach is superior to the make the decision now and hope for the best later and work out the details later. Absent an emergency which requires action right now, I think you've got a superior approach with the way you've revised it, because that allows you to come up with these very questions that you're coming up with now. Answer them before you go forward with the model. You adjust the model from all these decisions. I think it's a great system, and if you're looking for a yes or a no on that, I give it an unqualified yes. Thank you.
Other council comments, questions? Yes.
I just wanted to have a little more information about the possibility of, in the future, taking on the home confinement. What's the examples of nonviolent crimes?
Driving while suspended charges. And there can be situations, all depending on the defendant and the facts of the case. It could be a shoplifting case, things of that nature. But one thing that electronic home confinement also gives us the ability to do is we have supervised release cases where we have folks that have multiple DUIs or they're violent domestic violence situations, where normally would have those folks reporting to a probation officer periodically. You can also do EHC with alcohol monitoring, and you can do it where there's some type of, I can't remember the term, it's a location sensor where you can track where they're going. And it's one of those things where if the city implements this, instead of having supervised probation on some cases, we'll be able to do that where the companies will immediately notify us that, you know, something's gone awry, you know, there's a positive alcohol reading or there's this or that. We can take immediate action, and you know, we can even do warrants and have the people picked up if we're real concerned about it, where it's actually almost more efficient than having a supervised probation officer, because we'll be able to have more immediate information and be able to take immediate action. Because right now we have supervised probation officers that if something comes up, they have to petition the court for a court date to bring the person in. And so there's a lag time there where there's a level of, not a strong level of comfort during that time lag, where we should be able to cut that down by having these reports come in almost immediately, so we know what these defendants are doing.
I was concerned about city liability if someone went outside of their home and committed another crime, for example.
Yeah, and I mean, what happens is there's an immunity for a judicial officer as far as what you order, and so there would have to be some type of negligence on the city's behalf, and Mr. Bogert could probably talk more about that. But
Try to avoid that.
but I think with with what we're doing is going to be basically the the best process, based on the best evidence on what we need to do to put the best program in place. And I think that's what we're doing.
We met with the EHC provider that would probably be our desired provider, which is WASPIC, the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, who run the program around the state of Washington. And they reported that in 19 years of operating the program, they'd had one lawsuit that was settled, and it was for not allowing somebody to be on EHC. And at the time, it was in the early years when the person had a disability about hearing, and they couldn't hear the phone ring, and so the court said, this doesn't work for you, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there was a lawsuit. So it was for not allowing the person to be on EHC. So they successfully report, I guess, that of 19 years to not have any of the opposite types of lawsuits where their offenders have done something to cause liability.
Any other questions? Yes,
I do.
Jennifer?
Yes. Hello. You were talking about staffing and the different court staff and judges. Will there be a full-time judge, a part-time judge? Do we know as far as the number?
I wouldn't envision there would ever be a full-time judge, not during our lifetimes. I would think that when you move to the standalone court model, you're probably going to have basically the same situation, just go to a one-day court, possibly a day and a half, but probably no more than that.
Okay. Forgive me. My questions are a bit ignorant because I've never actually been to court. So are the judges elected?
Yes.
Okay. So who would set the salary?
Pardon?
Who would set the salary?
That's set by a state commission.
Oh, okay.
And so what would happen is, for instance, if your judge was, as far as full-time equivalent, let's pick a number, a 0.4 FTE, you would pay 0.4 of what a district court judge's salary is.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Certainly, thank you to the two chiefs for continuing to work this issue and try and get us towards a process that's good not only for the public but certainly for our budgets and our own processes. The court as well. Thank you very much for continuing to work with us and, quite frankly, bringing forth some different variations that I think are going to be helpful. And Judge Higginson, for you yourself of working as closely as you are with the two cities to really come up with a good program for us.
I would echo those thoughts. I think we knew we had some areas that we wanted to get better, efficient in, and leadership from Chief Lackey and others has said, hey, let's look at some options. And once that started getting noticed and talked about, that's when we got some good conversations going. And so the stuff that you brought forward tonight, I really appreciate the partnership from your perspective. And can't help but think that people's roots don't leave them. They just want good things for the communities they grew up in. So, Judge, we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is animal control.
We're going to elect a dog catcher.
Are you the new dog catcher?
Okay, that's me.
Those mics are so hot.
There. Good afternoon, councils.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
I'm here to bring you an update on the animal control operation. And tonight we're going to cover the partnerships that we have, that being with West Columbia and with the Humane Society of Southwest Washington. Bring you up to speed with a little bit of the history of the Animal Control Service. how the animal control officers kind of assist in containing some of our costs. The call reports, we picked a couple of years to look at call reports, and we'll take a look at those. Some recent enhancements that have been made, some program options and revenue, and next steps. Okay, our key partnerships. We deal primarily with West Columbia Gorge Humane Society. They're our primary facility that we use for impounds for the citizens here of Camas and Washougal. And then we have a backup facility that we use with the Humane Society for Southwest Washington. And we use them primarily just for the any overflow, and they only accept the animals that our officers bring to them. Now, for a little history on animal control itself, I had to go back through some of the files, and some of you probably have been here a little longer than me and have a little more history, but this is what I found. Starting in July of 1983 was the first interlocal joint agreement between the two cities for animal control services. And at that time, the animal shelter was located in Camas on James River property. Washougal provided the animal control officer and furnished the vehicle, and Camas provided and maintained the facility. The agreement at that time called for the officers' time to be split 60% of the time in Camas and 40% with Washougal. And that ran that way for about 11 years. And in 1984, there was another interlocal that came out, and it was amended a little bit to show, beginning in January 1 of 1995, that the cost would be shared 50-50, and Camas was still responsible for the kennel facility and the costs associated with that. Come along in 1996, there was a letter sent to both mayors from James River that said they wanted the facility moved off of their property. So somewhere along in September of 96, the Humane Society for Vancouver was the primary facility where they took animals, and they started discussion of planning to build a facility in Washougal. In 1996 of October, it looks like they added another animal control officer to bring it up to 2 full-time officers. 1999, they actually started the construction for the facility that's presently here on Index Street in Washougal. January of 2000, the interlocal was amended again, and now that we had the facility here in Washougal, Washougal was responsible for the housing and disposal of the impounded animals. Animal control officers cared for, fed, cleaned the kennels, and the program costs were still shared at 50-50. The cost of the facility itself was the responsibility for Washougal. And during this time, customer service costs were not included as a cost of the program, and there was no overhead programmatic cost. And Camas was paying $45 per impounded dog.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
So customer service costs, that is the people there to let your dog out if...
That, and when they would come, the way it works now, they come up to the city hall here to do their licensing, so they're dealing with finance and the front staff to do all the paperwork to release the dogs, license the dogs, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so now in June of 2006, City of Washougal entered an interim agreement with West Columbia to provide services. And at that time, they were charging $10 per dog, and had an agreement up to $5,000 to stock the kennel. Come along 2007, Washougal entered agreement with West Columbia, and the cost went to $10 per dog with a $25,000 annual payment to basically run the kennel and take care of all of those needs. Washougal's costs were included in the shared program costs, or the West Columbia costs were a part of that cost from June of 2006 through December of 2009. And then come 2010, Washougal picked up that cost, the annual cost of West Columbia. Coming to 2011, Washougal amended the agreement again. It was $15 per day, capped at 5 days and $70. And then Washougal lowered the amount they paid to West Columbia to $12,500. Again, that was paid just by the city of Washougal. Humane Society of Southwest Washington was our backup provider, and they were charging us $70 per dog through 2011. The annual cost there ran between $1,000 to $2,500, and that again was included in the shared programmatic costs. 2012 came along, and again, another amended agreement with Humane Society of Southwest Washington and West Columbia. It went to a flat rate of $120 per dog, and again, that was included in the shared costs. The 2013 agreement that was just completed, Southwest Washington Humane Society increase their costs. I think you've kind of seen this in the paper, that they've increased their cost to $132 per dog. We modified that contract with them to show that we're only going to pay that for animals that we actually drop off. What was happening is you get citizens that were coming and bringing in dogs there, and we were getting dinged for that cost. So we'd have to go through the paperwork, try and find out, did this really come from either city? And now we just, you send them to the shelter here and we'll take care of them here.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is it a no-kill or not?
West
shelter?
Columbia?
Yeah.
West Columbia is a no-kill shelter.
Okay.
As best they can. I mean, there's.
Yeah.
And the West Columbia still maintained their $120 per dog fee.
Okay.
Now we'll look at some of the history of the program costs. There's a lot of information on here, but there's a couple of things that kind of stand out, and you look at the cost between 2006 and 2007, you can see that there's a large increase there. In looking at that, half of that cost was salaries and benefit changes, and the other part of that was the $25,000 to West Columbia. The other thing that stands on the other end is when you look at the revenue side of it, that the revenues are way below the cost to run the program. And we have another slide on that towards the end that we can take a look at. Our animal control officers, how do they handle a potential impound? They do make several attempts to do something before they just take the dog or to the kennel. That might be, checking the license, the tags, a scan for a microchip. Part of the problem is even if the dogs are microchipped, my understanding is there's a couple different varieties out there. So they have a scanner, the shelter has a scanner, and even that, sometimes it doesn't always pick them up. They'll try and check with neighbors. Some of the dogs they just know from past history, they know that dog lives at this residence. And then they'll check voicemails. Usually those come in after the fact, but they do everything that they can do before they run the dog over to the kennel and impound it. And that brings us to the animal control reports. Again, this is just a 2-year snapshot, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the calls that they handle. And you look at, most of these stats are fairly close, except for in the area of field contacts, and you can see that there's quite a few more field contacts in Camas, or in Washougal and in Camas. And a field contact is any time the officer talks to a citizen. That's how they count that. And from what I'm told, those are greater in the summertime. And a lot of those contacts are done at the Sandy swimming hole and out on the levee. So the officers are out there. They might talk to 10 or 12 people during that time, so it adds up rather quickly. welfare checks, a few more of those, but, and those just happen to be calls where maybe somebody's left their animal in the Safeway parking lot and the windows are rolled up, or there's a complaint about an animal that doesn't appear to have any shelter or food or water, that sort of thing. Recent service enhancements. We put a workstation at West Columbia for the animal control officers to work out, kind of give us a little bit more control over the comings and goings. We've coordinated the animal control officers and tried to work with the Humane Society to offer a little bit more or a little longer hours of operation. For instance, they now report to the kennel first thing in the morning, and there may or may not be someone from the Humane Society there, but they're available to the public. They go in and just take a look at the dogs, be there in case of someone is there, and they cover that over some of the weekend hours where the staff is short as well. We've also given the animal control officers the ability to collect some fees so that we can release animals to owners. And that was an unfortunate situation over the weekend when City Hall was closed, or after 5 o'clock, they couldn't come in and bail their dogs out. And nobody liked that scenario. So we've kind of got that figured out now as best we can. We've used it a few times and it seems to work. All these things basically came at no cost, with the exception of some software that we purchased so that we can get some better tracking of the comings and goings at the kennel. The PetWare program that they were using was failing, and we just update it to an actual kennel management program so we can track better what's going on with the animals. Program options. So we'll look at all these different options here, leave it status quo, to discontinue the interlocal, the city to operate the program. We don't recommend it, but service reductions, and then program review discussion. So under the status quo, the Humane Society provides all impound services. They do a very good job with their adoption and foster program, so it kind of lessens the chance of, that's what really makes it a no-kill shelter. They do help out quite a bit with some basic first aid, so that reduces some of our veterinary costs that we might see. And again, they've increased some of their hours and working with us, so we're able to offer better access to the public. If we return to a city-operated kennel the way it was before, we looked at it would probably be a savings to the city off the top of just under $12,000. However, you have to factor in some of the other costs now, which is kind of covered under the agreement with West Columbia and Southwest. And that would be in the areas of overtime to the animal control officer. So if one is sick or on vacation, they have to come in and take care of there's no one else to feed the care for the animals, so they'd be doing that. Added costs for food. Right now we're not paying for food. And our veterinary care is pretty low. They do help out quite a bit at the kennel with taking care of them. Euthanasia costs, which we expect we might see some increases on that. Today's costs right now, they're between $80 to $120 per dog, just depending upon the size of the dog. So taking those things in factor, we roughly figured that for us to run it ourselves, we'd probably be looking at each city about $6,500 in savings. Again, under the city operating, we feel there'd probably be some reduction in services just because the animal control officers are spending anywhere between 4 to 6 hours a day cleaning, caring for the animals, taking care of those needs. And these are the figures that the officers are telling me. We would be unable to do any type of an adoption or foster care program. It's just something we wouldn't be able to do, so we'd expect there'd probably be some increased euthanasia. I don't know that I've, other than maybe an injured animal or a dog that just could not be adopted because of an aggressive level,
Right.
we haven't had to euthanize any animals.
Right. Excuse me,
No, yeah.
would we lose the volunteers?
If we ran
If
it ourselves,
themselves
I don't know how we would kind of,
incorporate
Yeah.
that? That's, yeah, because they kind of have a good volunteer basis, the way it is, and like you said,
they
from the
have a very
foster care
passionate
program.
volunteer base.
Very, and it's, yeah, I'd hate to see that go.
And they do also, I know they're trying to help people with the spay and neuter costs, low-cost spay and neuter programs. They negotiate for medications, the things that we just wouldn't be able to do.
Right.
Enhanced program revenues. Okay, that's back to that one slide we talked about. Obviously, the impound fees do not cover the full cost of the impound. You know, again, you see that going on in the papers now with Southwest. Currently, Washougal's impound fees are on a 3-tiered schedule at $25, $75, and $150. So there's a possible subsidy there of $95 per dog. Camas has a 2-tiered system of $35 and $50. So you could be in the hole to $85 per dog. So I looked at a couple of other cities just to kind of see where we were at with our impound rates. The city of Battleground charges $143. The city of Vancouver has a 3-tiered system, plus they have daily care of $10 per dog. So we're kind of somewhat.
I helped negotiate that contract, and that's a pretty complicated fee structure. What can I say about it?
It is.
I didn't understand it, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so what are our next steps? You know, we're working now staff is working to update the interlocal between the two cities. And it would probably be very helpful to review the codes to make sure that there's some consistencies and the fees are where they're supposed to be. And with that, questions, what other questions you may have?
A couple quick clarifications, either Chief or Jennifer. In regards to the fees that we collect now, each city, as we license animals within our cities, each respective city keeps those licensing fees to their own budgets, correct?
Yes? No?
For the licensing fees, yes.
Okay.
For the actual doggy jail fines.
For impounds?
Currently keeping the revenue, but that's one of the changes that we're making to the interlocal agreement.
So that potentially the fines paid by Camas residents to get Fido out of jail go back to Camas to offset their costs.
That's what we're going to propose for the fees. In the past, it has not been that way.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Questions from council? Greg?
Minor organizational question. The animal control officers report to the duty sergeant or to the captain, or
They report to Sergeant Chicks, and when he's not there, they can report to any supervisor, but the way we have it delegated, they do have an assigned supervisor. In his absence, then it would be a sergeant, commander, myself.
Thank you.
Joyce?
How much is the licensing fee, and is it the same in Camas and Washougal?
You know, that's the one thing that.
I think it's $25 for Camas for the lifetime of the dog, and I think Washougal it's $25 for the life of a non-fixed dog, and
Yeah.
$15 for a fixed dog.
I think, yeah.
There's no printer.
Thank you.
This is Jennifer's moment. What do we pay an officer per year? I'm just wondering what we pay an officer to clean a kennel and to feed a dog. And I realize, I always picture the responsibility or the reason they might be paid a lot is going out and capturing those dogs. That could be really scary, but I'm wondering how can we save money by with the cleaning and the feeding? Just share with me.
They're not currently doing it.
Right.
Right now, volunteers are doing it through West Columbia Gorge. I volunteer there on Fridays for the past 3 years, so I go down there every night, or not every night, every Friday night, and I clean out the kennel and feed them and give them their medications. If we were not partnering with the Humane Society, then the
We
animal
lose
control
that,
shelters
yeah.
would have, or officers would have to do it.
Have to do that.
Okay, so I didn't misread it. It did state that, didn't it?
It did.
And that was one of the original intents with going to West Columbia back in '06, was that it would free up the officers from doing those types of duties to spending more time actively out and about on the street.
I had a couple of questions. How do we handle what we deem as dangerous dogs? Do we take them to West Columbia Gorge? Do we take them to Southwest? Do we take them to?
We'll take them to our primary facility, which is West Columbia. For some reason, if we couldn't, then they would go to Southwest.
And thanks for figuring out the after-hours problem about retrieving the dogs. I know that caused some heartburn in the community.
It was painful, I think, for everybody. And
I'm sure.
As you know, I have dogs, and if I'd want to bail my dog out too. But I was just trying to. There's some other things that we had to consider.
Sure.
How to handle money and do this and make it work. But I think that's been ironed out.
Just an observation. It would be kind of interesting to look at whether Battlegrounds retrieval rates are higher or lower than ours. I would suspect that if you significantly raise the cost of retrieving your dog from jail, that fewer dogs would be retrieved, and that there's a trade-off there between raising the rate and increasing revenue, and then having to spend that revenue on increased euthanization.
That's a good point, because you're right. People will spend more money, I think, on their animals than anything, but yet you have to be able to pay for it.
Right.
So you don't want to make it so high as to the point
Yeah.
that I can't even get my own dog out, so I'm going to walk from that. The goal is to get the animal back with the owner, but there is a balancing point there. I don't know what that is.
And then the other question is, are we doing anything at all about cats?
We don't allow cats in Camas or Washougal.
It's a figment of your imagination.
You know, that
Just open yourself up for civil rights law.
By the cats. Garfield is coming.
No. We don't license cats.
Yeah.
I believe
We don't directly.
we don't. I mean, now, if there's an issue involving an injured cat or that type of thing, of course, we're going to, take that cat.
Feral cats or
Yeah,
something like that. if
and
there's-
and we try and work with peoples with West Columbia to maybe do some things jointly with feral cats, but for the cat that's coming over into your yard and your garden, no.
Yeah, I was aware that we do not have any code on that because I've had my ear bent on the subject several times. And I just, it's something that we should maybe consider.
Well, you might find it difficult to find commonality in city ordinances if that's an advocacy that you're taking.
No, it just,
I don't mean to be disagreeable.
yeah, no,
From
yeah,
past experience.
yeah.
Can I
Let's
use
talk
an
afterwards.
Like herding cats, have you heard the phrase like?
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Not to belabor the issue of cats, I'll use an example of Portland. A lady I worked with, I took her home one day, and the minute I drove up to her house, I could smell urine before I got out of the car. It was disgusting. Went in the house, she had cats walking all over the counters. It was just gross. So I called on her, to find out what their rule was, and you could only have I forget how many cats you could have, but you could only have 2, maybe 3 females that weren't fixed, and, you know, the male had to be fixed. There was a ratio of what you could have. Do we have anything like that to help the population is what I'm trying to get at? Is like,
You can only-
neuter as much as you can.
I don't think there's anything that's, I think there's a break, obviously, in the license fees. There's an incentive there to
Yeah.
get your animals spayed or neutered.
Right.
You're not supposed to have more, and I think it's saying, as Camas says, no more than 4 pets. That's a combination of dogs and cats.
Okay.
I think that enforcement would be the most difficult.
Yeah, it would be.
That,
That's the only way I knew was from the smell and just the deplorability of it and stuff, and it was inhumane to the animals.
I think we do have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, I think we do have instances where our animal control officers have stepped in when it becomes a nuisance issue, it becomes a nuisance for neighbors, it becomes a
Health issue.
In addition, while our programs don't directly, however you want to use that word, involve the cat population, I don't think it's news to anybody that through the dollars that we help support the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society with,
Right. The
they
cats.
do have cat programs.
And they neuter.
They do have feral cat and
yeah.
neuter programs and spay programs that they do, and
Yeah.
they do have an impact
Yeah.
on cat populations in our 2 communities.
Yeah.
We don't pay them specifically for those activities.
No.
But we know from their reports, everything else, that some of the dollars that we utilize through our service agreement to handle our dog shelter alone, some of those dollars do get used for those programs.
Right.
So
Okay, good.
a little bit of semantics in there.
And just one other thing, kind of following in on that, is how about other kinds of animals? Do we have any code against dangerous animals?
Exotic, we do.
Can people keep rattlesnakes and cobras and things? Alligators?
no dangerous animals. I think probably the
Exotics, no.
Exotics.
Yeah.
I think the closest we see to that might be certain type of snakes. No poisonous snakes. I haven't
Yeah.
dealt with those.
Well, that's another one that I would ask, do we need code?
I know Camas has a code on exotic.
Shannon?
I just wanted to follow up on Counselor Freeman's question. I think is it Jennifer? Okay, thank you. So of the, and it's on the expenses related, so of the 198,000 program expenses in 2012, do we then take, is that net of the registration, or I'm sorry, the doggy jail fees that you pay? Are those the total expenses?
Those were the total.
Okay.
We didn't net it out.
Okay. And then that total is just split between the two jurisdictions. And at a 50-50 rate, except for the 78.93, is that correct? And then that gets added to Washougal?
Correct. So in 10 and 11, we had agreed to pay the West Columbia subsidy here at Washougal, so that's why we backed that out before we divided it in half.
Okay.
And then the 7,800 is the acoustic loft materials that we put in the kennel for soundproofing. We didn't share that since it was a construction building cost.
Okay. And then, so we split it, but then right now, currently, the doggy jail revenue goes all back to Washougal, but it's going to change, and you're suggesting that we're going to change that in the
Correct.
interlocal?
Correct.
Okay, because that, I am a big advocate for the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, as I think I'm not the only one. But part of the reason when it was brought to our attention, when the interlocal was brought to our attention in December or January, we were surprised at the increase in cost and the expenses. We don't necessarily always see what's going on with the West Columbia Gorge. So it's really nice to get this, thank you. And that's all I want. I just wanted to be able to understand it better because we don't see your budget, and nor should we. trying to figure it out.
Well, sometimes you probably should. And that particular item, my apologies to the Camas Council. I know I've had opportunities to have discussions with your staff. In 2012, we were walking kind of a fine line. We, Washougal, were walking kind of a fine line because we had gotten to the point, as we drew back the direct subsidy dollars that we were paying to the Humane Society, the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society that Washougal was paying. As we took those back, those were affecting their service levels in a big way, to the point where they were literally trying to figure out if they should stay open or not. And at that point, we started looking at, okay, if that's a reality, what's our next option? Where do we go if they close their doors? Well, I think the simple answer is we would end up over at Southwest Washington Humane Society. We looked at their fee structure at the time and said, it's probably logical for us to pay those similar fees to West Columbia and give them some more certain funding and some stable funding than to go to any other option or have them disappear. The problem was, and then we also adopted their fees as they went forward up until this year, and we capped them at 120 rather than going higher. The problem was, I don't believe, and it was my oversight completely, of making sure that you all were informed of those changes, because it was going to change the expenses, and you can see from the reports they do. And just complete mind blank on our part of making sure that you're aware of that as we went through that process, so.
And so I'm assuming if we don't raise our fees in Camas, for example, and we only collect $35 or $50, the revenue that would come back to us would only be the revenue that are the $35 or $50.
Correct. So the
Okay.
bill would be offset by the amount of revenue that we collected on your
Okay.
behalf.
Perfect. And I can't remember what the other one was. Thank you for your explanation. I think you must have answered it. Otherwise, I don't know.
Dave?
Was your purpose today in bringing this forward strictly informational, or did you want to get some kind of a sounding from us on what we think about it?
Information.
I think primarily informational, and just to let you know that we are working on an updated interlocal agreement, and you can expect to see workshops probably in your separate chambers as the administration put the finishing touches on a revised interlocal agreement. One of the highlights is what we've just recently been discussing. It just updates the agreement and moving forward. When we presented those program options, I think it was just to show you that we've been looking at the full spectrum of the options. We looked at bringing it back in-house. There are not savings to be enjoyed by doing that.
Right.
Of any significance, and the service reduction that would accompany that. Now, just like any program in our overall general purpose portfolio, if a council is looking at cost reduction generally in the general fund, this, like any other general fund program, you can look at it. You could look at service reductions as a way to save money. But this program, like most of our general fund programs, is heavily staff cost driven. The predominance of those costs are to animal control officers. There is that $20,000 to $30,000 in the professional services agreement, but really that's paying for labor too, if you would. And much of that is volunteer, as we've discussed. So that was just there for informational purposes, but you can expect to see interlocal agreements coming through here pretty quickly.
Thank you. Connie Jo?
As Jennifer's never been to court, I've never been to doggy jail. Is Southwest over on 192nd?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's Vancouver, though. Right?
It is East Vancouver, right?
Okay.
Which is not our doggy jail, that's the backup. Our doggy
Yeah.
jail is right here in the port.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew about ours. I only walk by it. I don't have to go to doggy jail.
It might be safe just to mention, I think Chief alluded to this, but our two councils are not alone in struggling with this notion of rising costs for receiving impound services. The City of Vancouver is struggling with this. In fact, I think it's probably fair to say I received a call from their program manager in this area wanting to know how many spaces we had at our kennel, because they were looking for an alternative service provider.
Vouch for that.
Skamania County has knocked on our door. You've probably read the recent information about the county, whose costs in this program are significantly larger than ours, vastly much more expensive just because they're vastly larger. struggling with this notion. The Southwest Washington Humane Society has not shied away from their assertion that they began a couple years ago that they need to be charging us $170 per dog for impound services. They ramped us up toward that. They are not backing away from that assertion, and so that's why you see them at $132.50. We haven't had to have that conversation per se with the West Columbia, but I fully expect there to be another jump in 2014 with Southwest Washington. That's why we renegotiated our agreement with them so that we are only paying for their services if our officers bring a dog there. Citizens cannot bring strays. If a citizen finds a stray, and we appreciate that, they bring it. If they bring it over there, the staff at Southwest is supposed to inform them that we have a shelter over here and they're to bring the stray over here. Then it's 120, not 132.50. That delta isn't significant yet, but I expect it to get bigger. So it's like everything else that we're dealing with, cost pressures for the basic services that we're providing are affecting even our partners in the nonprofit sector, and so it's just a challenge we'll continue to work on.
Brett?
One of the things that I know Vancouver was considering was talking to Portland, the Oregon Humane Societies. Have we looked at that at all?
We kicked that around, but we did not look at that seriously. We didn't talk to them. It'd be interesting to know what they found. That's it's a little bit of a drive, but.
And again, I want to make sure and stress for both councils, the direction from the administration here and on through from the chief on down to the animal control officers is that we will do everything within our power that we reasonably can do to return the animal to its home before it ever gets to the impound stage. Even if they've got to hang on to the animal for an extra couple, 3 hours, even if we've got to go by one of the veterinary clinics and ask them to make sure and use all the wands that they've got on them to detect chips or any of that type of stuff. So we are truly trying to get it down to a last case scenario where the animal is actually impounded and those fees start out, so.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll make 2 comments and try to be brief. The first is looking at the system from the inside out, as I have the experience of doing and knowing it today. One thing I would encourage, and you mentioned it earlier on in your comments, was let's strive, if we can see agreement here, let's strive to get more uniformity in our ordinances. Someone mentioned the need maybe to have some exotic animal, or at least look at that in Washougal. We have that. You may well have some things. Let's try to come to middle ground. It's so much easier for staff. Would you agree, Ron?
I would totally agree.
And it's really easier for us if we get questions from our constituents. So it'd be nice to be uniform, both in the ordinances and the enforcement parts of it and the fee structure. If we could look at common ground and try to structure that way, it'd probably be easier for the Humane Society too. My second comment is this is a great example of a partnership, and it works very well, and we get great service from our provider. At least I'm speaking from my experience in Camas. So thank you for the job you do, and it illustrates the value of partnerships. You know, if we can work well together, and today we're talking about ways to make it even better, and that's how you massage a partnership to keep it going well. So thank you for the good work that you do there.
Yes.
I'd just like to second that.
So help me to understand. I'm looking at the report up on the screen there. For the city of Washougal, the expenses are $107,818. The revenue against that is $9,525.
That was the revenue that was exclusively from our own fees, from our code and our own licensing. I think a little piece of that $48.25 probably stayed with us. Any part of that was license fees in Camas stayed with Camas, but anything that was an impound fee, the way the agreement currently reads, that stays with us. We're going to propose that change.
Okay, if you take the 107 and the 98, you come up with that 206 above it, right?
Right. Yeah, the revenues aren't netted out. They're just there. They were there for illustrative purposes to show how small they are relative to the program cost.
Yeah. For us, these funds come out of the general fund, or?
For both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of probably where everybody stands, but where I stand, it seems to me the fines need to go up. It's pretty simple. We're funding people's dogs at this point. And I'm not sure the rest of the population really wants to have us fund it that much. So if we're going to get uniformity, I'm looking for fines that move up.
Or sliding scales type things.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Ways to look at it.
It's a lot of money.
It is.
I just wanted to tag on to something Dawn said about the more on the officers, for the animal control officers. I would really think that it would be very helpful if Washougal and Camas would get some of their codes more closely aligned, because I know it's a real problem for the animal control officers. I've talked to them at various times, and there's different sort of times for how long a dog barks, and so they have to think where they're at in Camas. It would be much simpler for them if they were at least much more closely aligned.
Chief, could you ask Rick and Brian to go ahead and start undertaking that and just looking at the codes and the fees between both and see if they can't at least start the process of finding those places that we might?
We can begin that process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Jennifer?
I have a quick question. Going back to the chart, can you talk a little bit about the impound revenues? The revenues from impound fees?
So that's the revenue that we receive from citizens who come to claim their dogs. They're very low initially, so if that doesn't happen to you often, you pay us a very low amount of money. And so most dogs are claimed, not all dogs, but I think...
But you have a pretty high...
I would say pretty
It's over 80%.
Right. So that just shows that at the rate of those charges, even when most dogs are reclaimed, we're getting revenue along those lines. Now you have to look at what are our costs to impound those dogs. Just the West Columbia agreement's in that $20,000 to $30,000 range, but then a big chunk of the actual program costs with the animal control officers could also be attributed to dealing with dogs that we impound. Not all of their costs, but a chunk of those. So the entirety of the program's cost of a couple $100,000 should not be borne by the impound charges, because that's not the only thing that the program does. However, we could identify and isolate that, and when we bring back the interlocal, and more specifically when we bring back a code coordination process, these fees will be part of that conversation. We can present different options for different rates of cost recovery. You can look at what the different implications would be for doing different rates. We can talk about ramping them up over time. There's different ways that you can explore cost recovery.
Okay, we have one more quick question. When you're talking about the agreement with Humane Society of Southwest Washington, and we're changing it to only dogs brought in by our animal control officers, I assume that includes Camas dogs as well?
Correct.
As well. Okay.
Correct.
And we're in agreement there, the two cities, that the citizens will not be able to bring in Camas dogs, only the officers. Is that correct?
No.
No.
Well, I think that just means that the Humane Society, our agreement with Southwest
We want 'em
Washington
to
Humane
come
Society,
here.
they're not going to charge us $132.50 if a citizen brings in a dog versus the animal control officer. I think.
And from the administrative side, remember, we have a contract in interlocal that authorizes Washougal to do those, and so we've talked about those things. And yes, we're in agreement with that shelter is the deferred shelter, the first shelter, because it's the cheaper. We maybe took the liberty to know the council well enough to know that option, the cheaper option, is probably the one they want. So.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Dave?
Is West Columbia Gorge on board with this?
I believe so.
Right. Yep. We have an agreement with them. We're operating with them. They're adapting to some of the service changes that we made, program changes, and we'll continue to work with them to make the program the best that it can be.
Thank you.
And hopefully for them to contain their costs as much as possible as our service.
I have a question regarding the Vancouver's revenue, where it talks about different fees for how how frequently the dog gets impounded. Does that happen often? We get repeaters that actually end up impounded?
Oh, yeah.
So that is something that to consider also if it's happening. To me, it makes a lot of sense that if the dog is being impounded twice in 1 year, I can see why the second time it should cost more.
Yeah, I can't tell you how often that happens, but and listen to the animal control officers, and you probably see the same little mug back in there.
Sometimes I do, yeah.
Joyce?
How many dogs does the shelter down here hold?
There's 12 kennels.
12 kennels.
Sometimes the kennels hold multiple dogs if they came in together or they're little or something. But rarely are they all full.
Any other questions from council? Comments?
I just would like to say, since I wasn't planning on being here, I'm going to have to beg to leave, if that's all right.
Don't worry.
I'm
I don't know,
glad
we
I...
should put it up for a vote.
You don't
I
have to
think.
vote.
All in favor?
That's to pass both councils.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see everybody, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melissa.
Good job so far. Thank you. Good to see you.
Chief, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to the other chiefs in white uniforms. My apologies. We thought we would get to you by 5:30, and this is, the good news is we're not up against a hard timeline yet for some of the stuff under the fireside.
Excuse
Just-
me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
This off was 2 minutes ago.
I understand. I understand completely. We do have televisions downstairs that are hooked up, by the way. Just a bit of information. We do have, the Washougal Council has another meeting at 7 o'clock tonight, so we are going to try and break right at 6:30, which means we probably aren't going to get all the way through this, unfortunately. I would like to leave, if possible, and if the councils are in agreement, at least a 5-minute portion at the end at 6:25 for public comments before we break. We okay with that? Chief, again, my apologies. You're up.
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, thank you. David and I will get started here. We're here to talk to you tonight about the fire consolidation that we've been doing for the last couple years coming up on. Actually, as an operational consolidation. Actually, we've been doing this for about 3 years total, which is pretty amazing for somebody like me who came into this sort of partway through. Just to kind of a recap of the timeline that we've, how long this has been going on. The actual first meeting of this, putting this consolidation together, was back in June of 2010, which predates my hiring here. I came on in July, right when we actually put the staff together, which happened in July of 2011. We started the trial merger. In February of 2012, the merger was extended by both cities until the end of this year, till the end of 2013. And then we created you folks created the Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee that was approved by both councils. In April of 2012, both fire chief positions were combined. And then in May of 2012 was actually the first RFA planning meeting that was held. January 13th and, January of 2013 was a big decision-making point. That was when consultant Paul Lewis gave his financial analysis presentation to the RFA Planning Committee. And then in February of 2013, the RFA Planning Committee decided against exploring the Regional Fire Authority, but voted to recommend continuing along the path of consolidation. And that's one of the things that brings us here to you folks tonight.
So there is a recommendation from your Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee. It really came in two parts. The first part was to not continue to pursue a Regional Fire Authority at this time, and instead to make progress along a further functional consolidation, and to forward that recommendation to both of the councils. And then secondary to that, there's a little bit of a formality, if you would, in the statute about the disposition of an RFA Planning Committee. If you're not pursuing an RFA, then you disband the RFA Planning Committee, and the RFA Planning Committee essentially can disband itself. So kind of in this altogether action that they took, they recognized the need to do that if indeed we weren't pursuing an RFA Planning Committee. However, they felt as a group that some sort of a joint committee was still important to have some oversight over the process of furthering the work of functional consolidation. So I think your Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee has a very succinct recommendation here. It's pretty straightforward. However, I would turn to those councilors from both cities that were members of the Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee if you had anything to add with respect to your recommendation to your colleagues.
I was just going to point out that the bottom line conclusion from Mr. Lewis was, in analyzing it, and we agreed, that there is no advantage to pursuing an RFA that the cities can't do themselves individually or collectively through an interlocal agreement. And so it's really an easy decision.
Dave?
I think if there's any way that the group could be of service to the chief and the two administrations, there's no doubt in my mind, knowing the members as I do, that they would be happy to step forward and do it. I just volunteered you.
Okay. So that was their recommendation. So I guess kind of pausing at this point, obviously there's not action that can be taken tonight, but would pause here to see if there's feedback from the councils about this recommendation of not pursuing a regional fire authority and the notion of having some kind of a joint committee that works with the administrations. Of course, as administrations, we'll work on whatever interlocal agreement is the right vehicle, and we have lots of information to share coming up, but this is sort of a milestone decision here for the communities, and wanted to know if there was any conversation the councils wanted to have about that.
Any heartache? Connie Jo?
Well, first question comes to my mind is, how do we want to form that joint committee? Opinions?
Rick?
Same as we had it before in the RFA?
Rick?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Before we get down to the nuts and the bolts of that, I'd like to make sure the council, each council thinks as a whole, much like how the judge presented it, what do we want to achieve? It's a lot easier for a joint group to work together is if we're both trying to achieve the same goal. If there's conflicting goals and we throw two groups together that are equally in standing, it gets fuzzy. So that would be my suggestion before we, I'm not, bad word, rush to form a committee, that we agree on what we want to form first.
Makes sense to me.
Dave?
I love it. My suggestion would be to take the structure you've got, and since it's been in existence for a year, hold a new leadership election, and then do exactly what Greg's talking about, and that is decide what it is that this committee's going to do. Let's get a mission statement for the group, then move on.
Done?
You know, in the preface to our meetings, we really did, as a committee, talk about the alternative options to merge our fire services. And I don't know if those have been brought forward to the councils formally, Chief. Are they up there?
It'll come up in a little bit.
Okay. But, I mean, that, to me, that's the menu, and there may be other options that, in a brainstorming style, we might want to throw on the table, and then task the committee with exploring, examining with the advice and assistance of staff to come up with a consensus recommendation back to the two councils.
Paul?
Maybe I misunderstood Greg, but I think I want to kind of underline what he said and agree with him, that before we appoint a committee, we need to give it a task. And we need to be clear on what the goals are that the committee is supposed to accomplish. And I think that decision is more appropriately made by the councils rather than by the committee, which is a subcommittee of council.
Thank you. Steve?
The way I view this personally is that I am in a mindset where I believe we have an outstanding fire and an outstanding EMS organization in place. And I don't like to pay a lot of money, but some things are worth it in my mind, and this is worth it. And the question is that a unanimous feeling or not? I think we need to know that. What level of service and what are we shooting for in this combined organization needs to have a consensus before this committee is put together. And just because I want it to be as outstanding as it is doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be. And so I'm trying to tie into what you two have just said, but that's where I come from.
Shannon?
I guess can we take a step further back? I thought the question is, do we all have a consensus that we don't want to pursue an RFA? Isn't that the question that we're trying to?
That's the first question.
That's the first question. So among us, do we agree that we're not going to pursue an RFA, and then we can pursue from there, if I understand correctly?
Dave?
That was the committee's recommendation to the council. And I'm with you. Let's dispose of that. However, having done that, and we're talking about forming another committee, rather than forming another committee from scratch, I would suggest that you take the people that have spent the last 2 years grappling with this issue and form them as the nucleus of the new committee and let that group decide how they want to proceed. We've been grappling with these issues for 2 years now, even before the RFA Planning Committee was formed. And the people that were on the RFA were the people who were on that initial group that took a look at this. Use their expertise to decide where you want to go. They have an existing relationship with the two administrations, which will allow input from the administrations, input from the planning committee members. It's just an existing organization that functions well. And you can use that organization to create anything you want. But please take advantage of the expertise that exists there.
Absolutely.
Paul?
To answer your question, Shannon, I frankly was always very uncomfortable with the idea of an RFA. That, to kind of summarize the problem I had, was given that Washougal is up against what is in effect for us a $3.10 cap. If we create an RFA and you move those expenses out of the general fund, they still drive down that cap. So for the city council, what you've done then is you have accepted all of the expenses and completely given up control. And so I was always very uncomfortable with the idea of an RFA, and have been thrilled by how well the two departments have worked together. I think a number of us were a little skeptical, and I'm very happy to have been proven wrong as far as that goes. Going back to the lean management description, which Steve is much more expert than I, seems to me that there's a couple of things that you need to identify, even as tasks for the committee. And that says nothing about the abilities and the experience of the committee. I tend to agree with Councilmember Shoemaker that it's likely that the best people for the committee are the people who have put in the 2 years and are most informed. But I really think it's that we need to do a better job of setting out their task for them than just saying, okay, here's a committee, go at it.
Dave?
And that's the reason I want to use the existing committee to get to that. Before it dissolves itself and takes on a new role, I think that group should bring the recommendation to the council on what their new mission is. I think they're best qualified to do that, especially since they're adept at working with the two administrations. The two administrations and the Rump RFA committee can come up with a recommendation to the councils. And it needs the blessing of the council before it comes into existence. The RFA was created by the two councils. So will its successor be.
So it sounds like we're in consensus just from to remove the RFA and move forward to the committee. I just wanted to.
Should we just take a formal vote?
I don't think we can vote, but if we're consent, I'm sorry, Greg.
We can listen to your feelings one way or the other and
This is
potentially
government,
gauge
Steve, not
Yeah.
private.
My feeling is we should accept the recommendation of the RFA.
Jennifer?
Regarding the RFA.
Can I tell my opinion? Okay, I don't want to get into any issues here with voting, but I'm supportive and in consensus that we should accept the RFA committee's recommendation, and yes to second question as well.
Can I, would the councils be open to throwing another suggestion on the table?
Sure.
And this may go nowhere, and it comes with certain assumptions. First and foremost is that we are not interested at this point into forming an RFA. Second assumption is that our current consolidated department as it is functioning extremely well and is doing what we believed it would do, including having at this point some modest savings in operational costs. My belief is that there are really only two, if we want to continue that direction, the idea is to find a way to make this more permanent, that there really are only two options, and frankly, I think there's only one. One of the options is to figure out how we run a consolidated department that is still governed by both bodies. And I believe that that inherently has some oddities to it when you get to the administrative side of running a department, especially one that runs into the millions that it does and affects the two services, truly, fire and EMS, to both of these cities. So my last assumption is that truly what we're talking about is a contract for services, one city to the other, and one city taking the lead, much as we do on animal control, much as we do on courts, much as we do on some of the other things that we do. If that be true, frankly, I don't even care if you have committees. Personally, I think we have gone through this topic from top to bottom pretty well. This thing has been vetted all the way through. At this point, I would almost unhook the chiefs to run our fire and EMS department and put Nina and David together, potentially with Paul Lewis, to figure out how we pay for it. Because really, that's what we're down to. Financially, how do we make this thing work? And how does the contract flow, and what does the interlocal agreement look like that comes from there? And frankly, we already have part of that put together in the EMS program already. But it really comes down to the cost sharing itself. From an administrative standpoint for myself, and I don't know where Scott is on this, I would just as soon see this consolidation, if that's what we're doing, happen before the year is out, so that we've got certainty to budgets. We've got certainty as we go through. Both of our contracts are up this year with our respective fire unions, and we kind of have that as a goal going into it. Part of it I know is also Sean speed. So sometimes that doesn't always work. But I think in this one, I don't think there are many questions that are left unanswered on this thing as we go through it. I am cognizant of the fact, and I believe if we contract for services, it's most likely, in my mind, it's Washougal contracting to Camas for those services. And I know that there is some element out there that says, are we too top-heavy contracting and having Camas run so many of our services? But in this one, again, we're talking about something where they already have the EMS side and have run it for years for both of us. We're talking about a department that has far more employees than we have in our traditional fire department, and I believe that the operational aspects of it are already there. So, not to say that we don't bring regular updates back, or David and Nina don't bring regular updates back to the councils. or potentially even to the public safety departments before, or committees before it comes back to full council, and to be able to do some check-ins. But I think we're at the point where we start putting this thing in motion and causing it to begin coming to a conclusion of whatever it happened to be. So I just offer that out. Greg?
I don't mind not being on a committee, by the way. But on a serious note, I would like to loop back to what I made in the earlier comment, and that is, if you, as a council, we individual groups don't set what do we want to achieve, what service level do we want this organization that might come out of this to achieve, they're either pushing a balloon with an elephant, or they're three blind men in a room with an elephant trying to figure out what kind of an animal it is. We need to set what service level do we want this organization that we're talking about contracting for. I'm not against that. You need to set your contract specs. I don't know, Steve, you can talk more task level to that, but you need to say what you want, and then you can figure out if you can afford it. And then you may have to adjust reality. But it needs to be objective for the chief, I think, to be successful at coming back at us again, or he's just going to bounce back and forth. And I'm sorry, you're good, but I don't know how good your crystal ball is if we don't tell you what we want.
Has anybody seen him dribble? Dave?
I agree with you. And the reason I agree with you is that I think we need to evaluate the level of service we're getting, and the way to do that is to have the level of service that we want established. So I agree with you for a different reason. I want to evaluate what's happening. And I think the standards you're proposing are the way to do that. Nice going.
And I just want to say that I think what we're talking about is what level of service do we expect, and what level of service can we be comfortable with? And that's a big part of it, because what are we willing to, what are the citizens willing to pay for? And so we need to find something, you know, what can we get for a certain amount of money? What level of service can we maintain for a certain amount? And hopefully that will help with Paul Lewis.
I think part of that, and correct me if something changed in the process, I think part of that has been answered. One of the things that we said from the start, at least one of the things I said from the start, was that the level of service had to absolutely be maintained at where it was or higher.
And I think that might be something that has to be revisited.
I would
And
agree.
I agree with that, only because I'm going to say the other word that's out there is perception. And we've got to deal with perception with data, with information, with standards. Perception is there's an imbalance. See, it's that other elephant in the room.
Sean, I'd only like to add one part to it, and that it just, from the conversation that we had on the committee and from what we've heard tonight, there are true policy issues that need resolution. It's not as easy just to tell the chief to go do it and bring it to us and we're going to do it. There are, in addition to the service level issues, there are transition issues that are really truly policy because they affect budgets, and we do have exclusive sanction over budgets. So I think there is some massaging yet to be done. I want it to be out of my hair as quickly as I can and keep it as efficiently as we have it. I know the fire union can't wait to get this resolved so that they have some stability and know where they're headed as well, and the chiefs. But I do think there are some policy issues that need attention from that level, and it's so, to me, that lends itself to the other comments that you heard tonight.
The only comment I think I would add, I appreciate Sean's willingness to tackle projects in a quick way, and I agree that there is no reason for this to take a long time. I think we do have people in place that have got some built-in ability who've been working on this. Operationally, I think things are working very well. We have an expiring interlocal agreement, and that would serve as a great deadline, and even prior to that, to making sure whatever the solutions are achieved before we have to go back to that conversation and say, are we going to do a 6-month extension, are we going to do a year? Let's try to get this thing wrapped up in 2013. And I believe that can be done with whatever format these councils want to take on. I mean, it's April. We got a lot of time. So I think if the consensus from the councils is the committees need to be involved, that's great. And I think I would ask, and I think maybe this is what Sean would also ask, is let's be aggressive in our schedule. Let's make this a priority for our communities to answer this question finally and move on. And I think that will help everyone. So.
Last comments. We're going to head to public comment.
I'd just point out for the councils that however the Camas Council gets these presentations, I think through that Granicus package you have, and then in your Dropbox, Washougal councilors, is the rest of the presentation. There's some other information. It basically touches on the issues that you were just addressing, and it talks about next steps. And if I just jump to the very last one, oops, I'm on the wrong one. It is that we, as administrations, begin to start to pull this together in an expeditious fashion and bring the key issues forward, working with a committee, because we were leaning toward the notion that you would accept the recommendation of your planning committee. There's a little cart before the horse conversation I heard, so as administrations we'll have to loop back and think about the process for the very first couple of steps to do that, but we'll get back. I just invite you to look at the rest of the presentation as background information.
Okay. Any last items? We are moving to public comment. Any folks from the public that would like to comment anything you heard tonight or anything else? I would just ask that you be extremely brief. Let's call it 30 seconds. So you really got to be brief, but if you come up to the microphone, get your name and address. Anybody at all? If there's nobody, I'll give Kevin 2 minutes.
Great negotiator.
Yeah, yeah. Nice.
Start off low and move to middle ground.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out that if Judge Higginson is correct, if we reduce officers, we have a lower crime rate. So is that true for firefighters also? If we reduce firefighters, will we have a lower fire EMS rate? 3 years. I just want to point out that we've been working on this in some form or another for about the last 3 years. And to answer Greg's question, which is a valid one, what service level do we want to achieve? I think from a service level standpoint, that's been analyzed, I mean, to no end. Even part of Paul Lewis's presentation analyzed the service level impact and where we'd like to go with that. So I understand the perception. I get what you're alluding to. From the boots on the ground, the service level has enhanced in every portion of both jurisdictions. You know, that's an anecdotal analysis, but I'll tell you that's the case. You know, in February of 2012, when you extended the merger through the interlocal agreement, we did not establish a continued agreement with labor. Again, I just reiterate that you've still got our commitment to continue, but we don't have that established formally because realistically, we are anticipating we'd be long past this by now. You know, it seems like we're moving probably at a rapid pace for those of you who get to see it once in a while. For those of us who have been living this for the last 3 years, this is an eternity. I want to point out that the recommendation of both Paul Lewis and the RFA committee was to move forward with a permanent, and I stress the word permanent, consolidation. You know, many members of the two councils are here tonight who were on that committee who made that recommendation. I think Sean, I have to echo Sean's comments. The solution seems to be obvious to me also, and it seems to be what Sean outlined. And again, tonight, while you discussed the formation of another committee, I asked to what end? I would encourage you to empower your administrators and chief to determine the operational component and allow yourselves to remove yourselves from that and stay off of a committee and just work on the administrative piece that council has jurisdiction over so that we can move this thing forward and have it completed so that we can, you know, continue our buy-in and our support. And with that, thank you. It's still working well from my position. So thank you for the effort you've put into it thus far.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other members of the public that would like to comment to council? Okay. Scott, any last?
We had a great meeting tonight. We had more agenda than we had time for, and I think that's a sign of how great our partnerships are working together. I want to put Washougal on notice that I did promise my council that the next time we did a joint meeting, it would be on our regular meeting night so that we didn't have an extra meeting in the month, and so we'll just trade back next time. But we're looking forward to more great opportunities for us to work together.
Not a worry at all on my side. I'm here for you. Any last items from staff members? Chiefs, Dave? Okay. With that, we're at 6:30. We're adjourned. Washougal City Council will start its regular council meeting at 7 o'clock. Right, yeah. Don't mind if we start breaking down tables around.